Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, we open the pages of one of the most enchanting tales ever told. But before we begin, if these quiet stories bring you peace, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. I'd truly love to know where you're listening from and what hour of the night finds you here. Our little circle now stretches across oceans, bound by stories and calm. So dim the lights, let the air grow still, and let your mind wander gently with me into tonight's story. The Elf of the Rose. In the midst of a garden grew a rose tree, in full blossom, and in the prettiest of all the roses lived an elf. He was such a little wee thing that no human eye could see him. Behind each leaf of the rose, he had a sleeping chamber. He was as well formed and as beautiful as a little child could be, and had wings that reached from his shoulders to his feet. Oh, what sweet fragrance there was in his chambers, and how clean and beautiful were the walls, for they were the blushing leaves of the rose. During the whole day, he enjoyed himself in the warm sunshine, flew from flower to flower, and danced on the wings of the flying butterflies. Then he took it into his head to measure how many steps he would have to go through the roads and crossroads that are on the leaf of a linden tree. What we call the veins on a leaf, he took for roads. Aye, and very long roads they were for him, for before he had half finished his task, the sun went down. He had commenced his work too late. It became very cold, the dew fell, and the wind blew. So he thought the best thing he could do would be to return home. He hurried himself as much as he could, but he found the roses all closed up, and he could not get in. Not a single rose stood open. The poor little elf was very much frightened. He had never before been out at night, but had always slumbered secretly behind the warm rose leaves. Oh, this would certainly be his death. At the other end of the garden, he knew there was an arbor, overgrown with beautiful honeysuckles. The blossoms looked like large painted horns, and he thought to himself he would go and sleep in one of these till the morning. He flew thither. But hush, two people were in the arbor, a handsome young man and a beautiful lady. They sat side by side and wished that they might never be obliged to part. They loved each other much more than the best child can love its father and mother. "But we must part," said the young man. "Your brother does not like our engagement, and therefore he sends me so far away on business, over mountains and seas. Farewell, my sweet bride, for so you are to me." And then they kissed each other, and the girl wept and gave him a rose. But before she did so, she pressed a kiss upon it so fervently that the flower opened. Then the little elf flew in and leaned his head on the delicate, fragrant walls. Here he could plainly hear them say, "Farewell, farewell," and he felt that the rose had been placed on the young man's breast. Oh, how his heart did beat! The little elf could not go to sleep. It thumped so loudly. The young man took it out as he walked through the dark wood alone, and kissed the flower so often and so violently that the little elf was almost crushed. He could feel through the leaf how hot the lips of the young man were, and the rose had opened. As if from the heat of the noonday sun, there came another man who looked gloomy and wicked. He was the wicked brother of the beautiful maiden. He drew out a sharp knife, and while the other was kissing the rose, the wicked man stabbed him to death. Then he cut off his head and buried it with the body in the soft earth under the linden tree. Now he is gone, and will soon be forgotten, thought the wicked brother. He will never come back again. He was going on a long journey over mountains and seas. It is easy for a man to lose his life in such a journey. My sister will suppose he is dead, for he cannot come back, and she will not dare to question me about him. Then he scattered the dry leaves over the light earth with his foot and went home through the darkness. But he went not alone, as he thought. The little elf accompanied him. He sat in a dry, rolled-up linden leaf which had fallen from the tree onto the wicked man's head as he was digging the grave. The hat was on the head now, which made it very dark, and the little elf shuddered with fright and indignation at the wicked deed. It was the dawn of morning before the wicked man reached home. He took off his hat and went into his sister's room. There lay the beautiful, blooming girl, dreaming of him whom she loved so, and who was now, she supposed, traveling far away over mountain and sea. Her wicked brother stopped over her and laughed hideously, as fiends only can laugh. The dry leaf fell out of his hair upon the counterpane, but he did not notice it, and went to get a little sleep during the early morning hours. But the elf slipped out of the withered leaf, placed himself by the ear of the sleeping girl, and told her, as in a dream, of the horrid murder, described the place where her brother had slain her lover and buried his body, and told her of the linden tree in full blossom that stood close by. That you may not think this is only a dream that I have told you, he said, you will find on your bed a withered leaf. Then she awoke and found it there. Oh, what bitter tears she shed, and she could not open her heart to anyone for relief. The window stood open the whole day, and the little elf could easily have reached the roses or any of the flowers, but he could not find it in his heart to leave one so afflicted. In the window stood a bush bearing monthly roses. He seated himself in one of the flowers and gazed on the poor girl. Her brother often came into the room and would be quite cheerful in spite of his base conduct, so she dare not say a word to him of her heart's grief. As soon as night came on, she slipped out of the house and went into the wood, to the spot where the linden tree stood, and after removing the leaves from the earth, she turned it up, and there found him who had been murdered. Oh, how she wept and prayed that she also might die. Gladly would she have taken the body home with her, but that was impossible. So she took up the poor head with the closed eyes, kissed the cold lips, and shook the mold out of the beautiful hair. I will keep this, said she. And as soon as she had covered the body again with the earth and leaves, she took the head and a little sprig of jasmine that bloomed in the wood near the spot where he was buried, and carried them home with her. As soon as she was in her room, she took the largest flower pot she could find, and in this she placed the head of the dead man, covered it up with earth, and planted the twig of jasmine in it. Farewell, farewell, whispered the little elf. He could not any longer endure to witness all this agony of grief. He therefore flew away to his own rose in the garden. But the rose was faded. Only a few dry leaves still clung to the green hedge behind it. Alas, how soon all that is good and beautiful passes away, sighed the elf. After a while, he found another rose, which became his home, for among its delicate, fragrant leaves he could dwell in safety. Every morning he flew to the window of the poor girl, and always found her weeping by the flower pot. The bitter tears fell upon the jasmine twig, and each day, as she became paler and paler, the The sprig appeared to grow greener and fresher. One shoot after another sprouted forth, and little white buds blossomed, which the poor girl fondly kissed. But her wicked brother scolded her and asked her if she was going mad. He could not imagine why she was weeping over that flower pot, and it annoyed him. He did not know whose closed eyes were there, nor what red lips were fading beneath the earth. And one day she sat and leaned her head against the flower pot, and the little elf of the rose found her asleep. Then he seated himself by her ear, talked to her of that evening in the arbor, of the sweet perfume of the rose, and the loves of the elves. Sweetly she dreamed, and while she dreamt, her life passed away, calmly and gently, and her spirit was with him whom she loved, in heaven. And the jasmine opened its large white bells, and spread forth its sweet fragrance. It had no other way of showing its grief for the dead. But the wicked brother considered the beautiful blooming plant as his own property, left to him by his sister, and he placed it in his sleeping room, close by his bed, for it was very lovely in appearance, and the fragrance sweet and delightful. The little elf of the rose followed it, and flew from flower to flower, telling each little spirit that dwelt in them the story of the murdered young man, whose head now formed part of the earth beneath them, and of the wicked brother and the poor sister. "We know it," said each little spirit in the flowers. "We know it, for have we not sprung from the eyes and lips of the murdered one? We know it, we know it." And the flowers nodded with their heads in a peculiar manner. The elf of the rose could not understand how they could rest so quietly in the matter, so he flew to the bees, who were gathering honey, and told them of the wicked brother. And the bees told it to their queen, who commanded that the next morning they should go and kill the murderer. But during the night, the first after the sister's death, while the brother was sleeping in his bed, close to where he had placed the fragrant jasmine, every flower cup opened, and invisibly the little spirits stole out, armed with poisonous spears. They placed themselves by the ear of the sleeper, told him dreadful dreams, and then flew across his lips and pricked his tongue with their poisoned spears. "Now have we revenged the dead," said they, and flew back into the white bells of the jasmine flowers. When the morning came, and as soon as the window was opened, the rose elf, with the queen bee and the whole swarm of bees, rushed in to kill him. But he was already dead. People were standing round the bed and saying that the scent of the jasmine had killed him. Then the elf of the rose understood the revenge of the flowers and explained it to the queen bee, and she, with the whole swarm, buzzed about the flower pot. The bees could not be driven away. Then a man took it up to remove it, and one of the bees stung him in the hand, so that he let the flower pot fall, and it was broken to pieces. Then everyone saw the whitened skull, and they knew the dead man in the bed was a murderer. And the queen bee hummed in the air and sang of the revenge of the flowers and of the elf of the rose, and said that behind the smallest leaf dwells one who can discover evil deeds and punish them also. The little match seller. It was terribly cold and nearly dark on the last evening of the old year, and the snow was falling fast. In the cold and the darkness, a poor little girl, with bare head and naked feet, roamed through the streets. It is true she had on a pair of slippers when she left home, but they were not of much use. They were very large, so large indeed that they had belonged to her mother, and the poor little creature had lost them in running across the street to avoid two carriages that were rolling along at a terrible rate. One of the slippers she could not find, and a boy seized upon the other and ran away with it, saying that he could use it as a cradle when he had children of his own. So the little girl went on with her little naked feet, which were quite red and blue with the cold. In an old apron she carried a number of matches and had a bundle of them in her hands. No one had bought anything of her the whole day, nor had anyone given here even a penny. Shivering with cold and hunger, she crept along. Poor little child! She looked the picture of misery. The snowflakes fell on her long, fair hair, which hung in curls on her shoulders, but she regarded them not. Lights were shining from every window, and there was a savory smell of roast goose, for it was New Year's Eve. Yes, she remembered that. In a corner between two houses, one of which projected beyond the other, she sank down and huddled herself together. She had drawn her little feet under her, but she could not keep off the cold, and she dared not go home, for she had sold no matches and could not take home even a penny of money. Her father would certainly beat her. Besides, it was almost as cold at home as here, for they had only the roof to cover them, through which the wind howled, although the largest holes had been stopped up with straw and rags. Her little hands were almost frozen with the cold. Ah, perhaps a burning match might be some good, if she could draw it from the bundle and strike it against the wall just to warm her fingers. She drew one out. Scratch! How it sputtered as it burnt! It gave a warm, bright light, like a little candle, as she held her hand over it. It was really a wonderful light. It seemed to the little girl that she was sitting by a large iron stove, with polished brass feet and a brass ornament. How the fire burned, and seemed so beautifully warm that the child stretched out her feet as if to warm them, when, lo, the flame of the match went out, the stove vanished, and she had only the remains of the half-burnt match in her hand. She rubbed another match on the wall. It burst into a flame, and where its light fell upon the wall, it became as transparent as a veil, and she could see into the room. The table was covered with a snowy white tablecloth, on which stood a splendid dinner service and a steaming roast goose stuffed with apples and dried plums. And what was still more wonderful, the goose jumped down from the dish and waddled across the floor with a knife and fork in its breast to the little girl. Then the match went out, and there remained nothing but the thick, damp, cold wall before her. She lighted another match, and then she found herself sitting under a beautiful Christmas tree. It was larger and more beautifully decorated than the one which she had seen through the glass door at the rich merchant's. Thousands of tapers were burning upon the green branches, and colored pictures, like those she had seen in the show windows, looked down upon it all. The little one stretched out her hand towards them, and the match went out. The Christmas lights rose higher and higher, till they looked to her like the stars in the sky. Then she saw a star fall, leaving behind it a bright streak of fire. "Someone is dying," thought the little girl, for her old grandmother, the only one who had ever loved her, and who was now dead, had told her that when a star falls, a soul was going up to God. She again rubbed a match on the wall, and the light shone round her. In the brightness stood her old grandmother, clear and shining, yet mild and loving in her appearance. "Grandmother," cried the little one, Oh, take me with you. I know you will go away when the match burns out. You will vanish like the warm stove, the roast goose, and the large, glorious Christmas tree." And she made haste to light the whole bundle of matches, for she wished to keep her grandmother there. And the matches glowed with a light that was brighter than the noonday, and her grandmother had never appeared so large or so beautiful. She took the little girl in her arms, and they both flew upwards in brightness and joy far above the earth, where there was neither cold nor hunger nor pain, for they were with God. In the dawn of morning there lay the poor little one, with pale cheeks and smiling mouth, leaning against the wall. She had been frozen to death on the last evening of the year, and the New Year's sun rose and shone upon a little corpse. The child still sat, in the stiffness of death, holding the matches in her hand, one bundle of which was burnt. She tried to warm herself, said some. No one imagined what beautiful things she had seen, nor into what glory she had entered with her grandmother on New Year's Day. The happy family. The largest green leaf in this country is certainly the burdock leaf. If you hold it in front of you, it is large enough for an apron, and if you hold it over your head, it is almost as good as an umbrella. It is so wonderfully large. A burdock never grows alone. Where it grows, there are many more, and it is a splendid sight, and all this splendor is good for snails. The great white snails, which grand people in olden times used to have made into fricassees, and when they had eaten them, they would say, "Oh, what a delicious dish!" For these people really thought them good, and these snails lived on burdock leaves, and for them the burdock was planted. There was once an old estate where no one now lived to require snails. Indeed, the owners had all died out, but the burdock still flourished. It grew over all the beds and walks of the garden. Its growth had no check, till it became at last quite a forest of burdocks. Here and there stood an apple or a plum tree, but for this nobody would have thought the place had ever been a garden. It was burdock from one end to the other, and here lived the last 2 surviving snails. They knew not themselves how old they were, but they could remember the time when there were a great many more of them, and that they were descended from a family which came from foreign lands, and that the whole forest had been planted for them and theirs. They had never been away from the garden, but they knew that another place once existed in the world, called the Duke's Palace Castle, in which some of their relations had been boiled till they became black, and were then laid on a silver dish. But what was done afterwards, they did not know. Besides, they could not imagine exactly how it felt to be boiled and placed on a silver dish, but no doubt it was something very fine and highly genteel. Neither the cockchafer, nor the toad, nor the earthworm, whom they questioned about it, would give them the least information, for none of their relations had ever been cooked or served on a silver dish. The old white snails were the most aristocratic race in the world. They knew that. The forest had been planted for them, and the nobleman's castle had been built entirely that they might be cooked and laid on silver dishes. They lived quite retired and very happily, and as they had no children of their own, they had adopted a little common snail, which they brought up as their own child. The little one would not grow, for he was only a common snail. But the old people, particularly the mother snail, declared that she could easily see how he grew, and when the father said he could not perceive it, she begged him to feel the little snail's shell, and he did so, and found that the mother was right. One day it rained very fast. Listen, what a drumming there is on the burdock leaves. Turn, 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 said the father snail. There come the drops, said the mother. They are trickling down the stalks. We shall have it very wet here presently. I am very glad we have such good houses, and that the little one has one of his own. There has been really more done for us than for any other creature. It is quite plain that we are the most noble people in the world. We have houses from our birth, and the burdock forest has been planted for us. I should very much like to know how far it extends, and what lies beyond it. There can be nothing better than we have here, said the father snail. I wish for nothing more. Yes, but I do, said the mother. I should like to be taken to the palace, and boiled, and laid upon a silver dish, as was done to all our ancestors, and you may be sure it must be something very uncommon. The nobleman's castle perhaps has fallen to decay, said the snail father, or the burdock wood may have grown out. You need not be in a hurry. You're always so impatient, and the youngster is getting just the same. He has been 3 days creeping to the top of that stalk. I feel quite giddy when I look at him. You must not scold him, said the mother snail. He creeps so very carefully. He will be the joy of our home, and we old folks have nothing else to live for. But have you ever thought where we are to get a wife for him? Do you think that farther out in the wood there may be others of our race? There may be black snails, no doubt, said the old snail. Black snails without houses, but they are so vulgar and conceited too. But we can give the ants a commission. They run here and there, as if they all had so much business to get through. They, most likely, will know of a wife for our youngster. I certainly know a most beautiful bride, said one of the ants, but I fear it would not do, for she is a queen. That does not matter, said the old snail. Has she a house? She has a palace, replied the ant. A most beautiful ant palace with 700 passages. Thank you, said the mother snail, but our boy shall not go to live in an ant hill. If you know of nothing better, we will give the commission to the white gnats. They fly about in rain and sunshine. They know the burdock wood from one end to the other. We have a wife for him, said the gnats. 100 man steps from here, there is a little snail with a house sitting on a gooseberry bush. She is quite alone and old enough to be married. It is only 100 man steps from here. Then let her come to him, said the old people. He has the whole burdock forest. She has only a bush. So they brought the little lady snail. She took 8 days to perform the journey, but that was just as it ought to be, for it showed her to be one of the right breeding. And then they had a wedding. 6 glowworms gave as much light as they could, but in other respects it was all very quiet, for the old snails could not bear festivities or a crowd. But a beautiful speech was made by the mother snail. The father could not speak, he was too much overcome. Then they gave the whole burdock forest to the young snails as an inheritance, and repeated what they had so often said, that it was the finest place in the world, and that if they led upright and honorable lives, and their family increased, they and their children might some day be taken to the nobleman's palace, to be boiled black, and laid on a silver dish. And when they had finished speaking, the old couple crept into their houses, and came out no more, for they slept. The young snail pair now ruled in the forest, and had a numerous progeny. But as the young ones were never boiled or laid in silver dishes, they concluded that the castle had fallen into decay, and that all the people in the world were dead. And as nobody contradicted them, they thought they must be right. And the rain fell upon the burdock leaves to play the drum for them, and the sun shone to paint colors on the burdock forest for them, and they were very happy. The whole family were entirely and perfectly happy. What happened to the thistle? Beside the vast and splendid estate stretched a garden so exquisite that travelers often paused just to marvel at its beauty. It was a place where every path seemed brushed by sunlight, and every flower had its own quiet song. Rare trees arched overhead like living chandeliers, their leaves murmuring secrets in the wind. Beds of tulips, roses, and lilies lay in perfect order, glowing with colors as soft as dreams. Guests of the manor wandered there in admiration, and their laughter mingled with the hum of bees and the whisper of the fountains. On Sundays and holidays, townsfolk would come from far and near, asking humbly at the gate if they might glimpse this paradise. Sometimes whole schools of children arrived, their eyes wide with wonder, carrying home stories of the magical garden that bloomed beside the great estate. Just beyond the high fence that enclosed this little Eden, there stood a single wild thistle. She grew in the narrow strip of earth between the polished world within and the dusty country lane without. Yet what a thistle she was! Strong, tall, and gloriously defiant, her leaves bristled like green armor, and her purple blossoms burned with royal color. She was no timid weed, but a queen of her kind. Still, no one noticed her beauty, no one except an old gray donkey who hauled the milkmaid's cart each morning. Whenever he passed, he would stretch out his long neck toward her, whispering in his gravelly voice, "Ah, what a beauty you are! I'd give my best load of hay just to taste you." But his rope was too short, and the thistle remained untouched, wild, free, and unseen. One radiant afternoon, the manor held a grand celebration. Gentlefolk in silks and satin filled the halls, and the sound of music drifted out through the open windows like perfume. Among the guests were noble relatives from the capital, young men with polished boots and confident smiles, and ladies who looked like flowers themselves in their flowing gowns. One of them, however, drew every gaze, a young woman who had come from far across the sea, from the misty hills of Scotland. Her hair glimmered like copper in the sunlight, and her eyes held the calm blue of northern skies. She was wealthy, high-born, and wise. Yet it was not her fortune but her grace that made hearts tremble. Every mother thought her a perfect bride. Every young man thought the same. After the meal, the guests drifted into the garden to play croquet on the lawn. Laughter rang out as mallets clicked and balls rolled over the soft grass. The young ladies, in a playful mood, began plucking flowers from the garden to place in the buttonholes of their companions. Roses, lilies, and violets soon adorned the men's coats. But the Scottish lady, wandering thoughtfully among the paths, found none that pleased her. Her eyes roamed beyond the fence, until she saw, rising tall and proud against the sky, the thistle bush in all her rugged beauty, its purple crowns blazing in the sun. "That one," she said with a sudden smile. "That is Scotland's flower. It blooms on my country's coat of arms. That, and no other, shall be mine." The young heir of the house, eager to please, climbed the fence. He reached for the finest blossom, and promptly pricked his finger on a thorn as sharp as a sword. Yet he laughed at the pain, for when the lady placed the thistle in his buttonhole, he felt it was an honor greater than any medal. The other men looked on with envy, for none would not have traded their garden blooms for the wild token from her hand. And the thistle herself, watching, was filled with a trembling pride, as though the sun had poured golden wine into her veins. I must be of finer breeding than I knew, she thought joyfully. A flower of noble lineage. One of my children has crossed the fence and found its place upon a nobleman's heart. Surely I, too, belong among the chosen flowers. In the days that followed, the thistle told her story to every new bud that opened. The breeze carried whispers from the garden, and even from the open windows of the manor she caught words of wonder. The Scottish lady and the young heir had fallen in love, and soon were to be married. "It was my doing," said the thistle proudly. "My flower began their love story." Her buds listened in awe. Soon she began to imagine her own future. "Any day now," she mused, "they will come for me. They'll dig up my roots gently and give me a place of honor inside the garden, perhaps even in a fine clay pot upon the terrace. What could be more fitting for the flower that united two hearts?" So she dreamed and dreamed until she half believed she already stood in a gilded pot. She promised each bud that bloomed, "You too will find your place beyond the fence, perhaps in a pot, perhaps even in a buttonhole." But none of her children were chosen. They lived and faded in the open air, kissed by sun and dew, visited by bees and wasps who came for honey and left her poorer for it. "What thieves they are," grumbled the thistle, "to take and never thank." Still, she kept her dignity. New flowers grew where the old had fallen. "Any moment now," she told them, "I shall cross the fence." The daisies and blades of grass nearby listened with admiration. Even the donkey stretched toward her longingly, though his rope still held him short. Time passed. Summer gave way to autumn. The garden blazed with color but smelled faintly of farewell. The wind grew cooler, the evenings longer. "How strange," sighed the thistle. "They are wed now, those two whom I united, yet I remain where I have always been, forgotten." But she consoled herself. A mother may wait patiently. Greatness is often slow to be recognized. One by one, her blossoms faded, until only one remained, a great silvered flower near her root, pale and beautiful as moonlight. When the cold wind blew, it shimmered like an artichoke of frost. Then one crisp morning, the young couple strolled together down the garden path. The bride looked across the fence and exclaimed, "There still stands the grand thistle, but she has no flowers left." Her husband smiled and pointed. "There's the ghost of one, the last bloom, silver as a star." "How lovely," she said softly. "We must have one just like that carved upon the frame of our wedding portrait." And once again, the young man climbed the fence and plucked the shining remnant. The thorns pricked him, as if to remind him that beauty often comes with pain. He carried the thistle into the manor, where a painter worked on a grand portrait. The newly married couple. In the picture, the groom wore a thistle in his buttonhole, and when the carving for the frame was designed, it was modeled after the thistle's final bloom, the one they had brought in from the roadside. The air itself seemed to hum with the tale, carrying it far beyond the garden walls. "How strange life is," murmured the thistle. "My eldest child rests in a nobleman's portrait, and my youngest adorns the frame. Perhaps this is what it means to have roots in one world and blossoms in another." The old donkey, passing once more, gazed at her fondly. "Sweet Thistle," he sighed, "if only my rope were longer." But the thistle no longer answered. She stood still and thoughtful, watching the frost settle on the field, feeling both proud and peaceful. Christmas approached and the world grew quiet. At last, she whispered, "When a mother's children are safe inside, she can rest content outside the fence." A beam of sunlight broke through the gray sky and touched her gently. "That is a noble thought," said the sunbeam, "and because of it, you shall not be forgotten." "In a flower pot?" she asked hopefully. "In something finer," replied the sunbeam. "In a fairy tale, and here she blooms forever." The gardener and the noble family. About 4 miles beyond the city, where the hills began to soften into fields and the roads were bordered with tall elms, there stood an ancient manor house. Its walls were thick and gray, covered here and there with moss that time itself seemed to have painted on with a patient hand. Towers rose from the corners, their pointed gables sharp against the blue of summer skies. The windows were deep set, their panes glimmering like old glass found at the bottom of the sea. In that venerable house, shaded by chestnuts and surrounded by meadows, lived, though only in the warmth of summer, a noble and wealthy family, descended from many generations of landed gentry. Of all the estates they possessed, this was the jewel, the heart of their inheritance. It was said that when the manor was first built, its stones had come from the finest quarries in Denmark, and the carpenters who shaped its beams had sung hymns as they worked. On the outside, it looked almost as if it had been newly cast in some giant's foundry. So strong and perfect was its form. Within, it was arranged for comfort and noble ease. Over the grand arched gate, the family coat of arms was cut in stone, and about it twined roses, white, red, and golden, like a fragrant crown for the house itself. The courtyard, soft with grass, was enclosed by a row of thorn bushes, red and white together, and near them bloomed many rare flowers, even beyond the borders of the greenhouse. The air always carried the perfume of blossoms, mixed with the faint sweetness of ripe fruit and cut hay. The family possessed, too, a gardener of uncommon skill and devotion, a man who seemed to speak the silent language of plants. To see his work was a joy. The flower garden shone like a woven tapestry of colors. The orchard bowed beneath its promise of fruit. The vegetable beds were as orderly as the shelves of an apothecary. Yet, among all the splendor, a part of the old garden remained. 2 great trees and a few box hedges clipped into crowns and pyramids. These ancient hedges had been planted in the days when powdered wigs were worn, and lovers strolled beneath the moonlight with songs and sighs. Behind them stood the 2 old trees, black and vast, whose branches were nearly always bare. They looked as though storms had flung clods of earth into their limbs, but those dark shapes were nests, hundreds of them. For there, from time beyond memory, lived a whole colony of rooks and crows, screaming, quarreling, nesting, and returning again every spring. It was a regular bird city in the air, older than the manor itself. The people below, though they built the house, were to the birds only temporary tenants. The true lords of the place were feathered, and they yielded nothing to human claims. Often, when the guns were fired to scare them away, the black clouds of wings would rise in fright, crying, "Rack, rack," so loudly that even the gardener felt the echo in his bones. He often urged the noble family to have the trees felled, for they were ugly and robbed the flower beds of sun. "If we remove them," he said, "the birds will find another forest for their racket, and the garden will be the better for it." But the family would not hear of it. "No, Larsen," said the master kindly. "Those trees are part of the old times. They have stood longer than our own family has owned the land, and the birds have inherited them by right. Let them stay. They belong to the manor as much as we do." Larsen, that was the gardener's name, though it matters little to the story, bowed and said no more. He was a faithful man, humble and industrious. The family knew his worth, though they sometimes wounded him without meaning to. They would praise his work, yet add, "Still, we have seen finer fruits and brighter flowers elsewhere." Those words stung him, for he worked with all his heart. One day they called him to the hall and told him of a dinner they had attended at a friend's estate. There they had tasted apples and pears of such rare flavor that all the guests had spoken of them. The fruits might be foreign, they said, but could surely be grown here if slips could be found. "Go to the fruit dealer in town," they said, "and discover whence those apples and pears came. If possible, order slips for grafting." Now the fruit dealer was no stranger to Larsen, for he was the very man who bought the manor's surplus fruit. When the gardener entered and asked after the famed apples and pears, the dealer smiled. "Why, they came from your own garden, Master Larsen," said he, showing the fruit itself. Larsen's heart leapt. He hurried home and told the noble family the good news, but they shook their heads. "Impossible. Bring us proof." So he brought a written guarantee, signed and sealed. Then amazement filled the house. From that day onward, great bowls of those same apples and pears graced their table. Bushels were sent to friends, even across the sea. "Still," said the family, "this has been a particularly fine season. Everyone's trees have done well." Larsen said nothing, but smiled inwardly. Not long after, the family dined at court and tasted melons so exquisite that the king himself praised them. "Larsen," they said upon their return, "you must obtain seeds from the royal gardener." "The court gardener?" said Larsen, bright-eyed. "But he had his melon seeds from me." "Indeed," said the master. "Then he must know better how to perfect them, for these were fit for princes." "Well," said Larsen quietly, "he had bad luck this year, and when he saw how fine ours were, he begged 3 for the royal table." The family laughed in disbelief, but again he brought proof in writing. The melons from their own greenhouse had graced the king's feast. The noble family blushed with pride, though they said, "Let us hope Larsen does not grow too proud." But Larsen's pride was not boastful. It was the joy of one who loves his work. From that year forth, he labored even harder, trying each season to produce something new, finer, more perfect. Yet when his strawberries matched those of any other gardener, they said, "Ah, but your first apples were better." When a single crop failed, radishes, perhaps, they spoke only of the failure. "It didn't go well this year, little Larsen," they would say, almost with relief, as though the balance of the world were restored. Twice each week, Larsen brought fresh flowers to the drawing room. His arrangements were so full of harmony that even dull colors seemed bright beside one another. "You have a gift, Larsen," said the lady of the house, "a gift from the Lord, not of your own making." He bowed, and his heart was quiet. One morning he brought a great crystal bowl. Upon the surface of the water floated a broad green leaf, and on it lay a blue flower, large and luminous as a star. The family gathered round. "The lotus of Hindustan," they exclaimed. They placed it first in the sunlight, then in the evening lamps, admiring it anew each time. Even the young princess, learned in botany and kind of heart, called it marvelous. The family, proud of the praise, sent the flower to her as a gift. When they went to fetch another to replace it, none could be found. The greenhouse, the garden, every corner was searched. At last they called Larsen. "Where did you find that blue lotus?" "In the vegetable garden," said he, smiling. "It is only the blossom of the artichoke, but look at it. How beautiful it is, though born of common soil." "You should have told us," cried the family. "You have made us ridiculous before the princess, showing her a kitchen herb as a rare exotic." And they ordered the flower removed at once. They even wrote to the princess to confess the mistake and to say that the gardener had been reprimanded. But the princess answered gently, "He showed you beauty where you would not have looked for it. I thank him. As long as the artichokes bloom, I shall have one placed daily in my chamber." And so it was. When the next flower came, the family admired it again and said, "Yes, it is very fine. Larsen does have good taste. Like a spoiled child, he loves to be praised." That autumn, a mighty storm rose over the hills. The wind came roaring through the woods, tearing up even the oldest trees by their roots. The manor shook, the windows rattled, and all night the crows and rooks screamed and beat their wings against the glass. By morning, the two ancient trees were gone, lying broken in the grass. "Now you must be pleased, Larsen," said the master sadly. "The storm has taken your wish upon itself. The trees are gone, the birds have flown, and with them all that was left of the olden days." Larsen bowed and said nothing, but in his mind he saw what might take their place. Soon the wreckage was cleared, and he planted the ground anew. Where box hedges had stood, he set plants gathered from Denmark's own wild fields, ferns, coltsfoot, primroses, lilies of the valley, and burdock, each in the soil and light it loved best. The garden became a living hymn to the land itself. In the center he raised a tall flagpole, and there the red Dannebrog fluttered proudly. Beside it stood another pole, twined in summer with hop tendrils heavy with cones, and in winter hung with sheaves of oats for the birds, so that even at Christmas time, life and kindness should not perish from the garden. "Our good Larsen is growing sentimental," said the family, "but he means well, and he is faithful." At the turn of the year, one of the city's illustrated papers printed an engraving of the old manor, showing the flag, the hop pole, and the oat sheaves. "A beautiful thought," said the paper, "to preserve this kindly custom in so ancient a home. Everything Larsen does," murmured the family, half proud, half envious. "They make a stir about. He is a fortunate man. We might almost be proud to have him." But they were not. They were good people, yet of the sort who must always be the masters. And that, perhaps, was best, for the world needs both kinds, the quiet Larsens who labor, and the noble families who, without knowing it, are taught humility by them. And that is the story of the gardener and the old manor. Now you may think upon it. What one can invent. There was once a young man who was studying to be a poet. He wanted to become one by Easter, and to marry, and to live by poetry. To write poems, he knew, only consists in being able to invent something, but he could not invent anything. He had been born too late. Everything had been taken up before he came into the world, and everything had been written and told about. "Happy people who were born 1,000 years ago," said he. "It was an easy matter for them to become immortal. Happy even was he who was born 100 years ago, for then there was still something about which a poem could be written. Now the world is written out, and what can I write poetry about?" Then he studied till he became ill and wretched, the wretched man. No doctor could help him, but perhaps the wise woman could. She lived in the little house by the wayside, where the gate is that she opened for those who rode and drove. But she could do more than unlock the gate. She was wiser than the doctor who drives in his own carriage and pays tax for his rank. "I must go to her," said the young man. The house in which she dwelt was small and neat, but dreary to behold, for there were no flowers near it, no trees. By the door stood a beehive, which was very useful. There was also a little potato field, very useful, and an earth bank with sloe bushes upon it, which had done blossoming, and now bore fruit, sloes, that draw one's mouth together if one tastes them before the frost has touched them. "That's a true picture of our poetryless time that I see before me now," thought the young man. And that was at least a thought, a grain of gold that he found by the door of the wise woman. "Write that down," said she. "Even crumbs are bread. I know why you come hither. You cannot invent anything, and yet you want to be a poet by Easter." "Everything has been written down," said he. "Our time is not the old time." "No," said the woman. "In the old time wise women were burnt, and poets went about with empty stomachs, and very much out at elbows. The present time is good. It is the best of times. But you have not the right way of looking at it. Your ear is not sharpened to hear, and I fancy you do not say the Lord's Prayer in the evening. There is plenty here to write poems about, and to tell of for anyone who knows the way. You can read it in the fruits of the earth. You can draw it from the flowing and the standing water. But you must understand how. You must understand how to catch a sunbeam. Now just you try my spectacles on, and put my ear trumpet to your ear, and then pray to God, and leave off thinking of yourself." The last was a very difficult thing to do, more than a wise woman ought to ask. He received the spectacles and the ear trumpet, and was posted in the middle of the potato field. She put a great potato into his hand. Sounds came from within it. There came a song with words, the history of the potato, an everyday story in 10 parts, an interesting story, and 10 lines were enough to tell it in. And what did the potato sing? She sang of herself and of her family, of the arrival of the potato in Europe, of the misrepresentation to which she had been exposed before she was acknowledged, as she is now, to be a greater treasure than a lump of gold. We were distributed by the king's command, from the council houses through the various towns, and proclamation was made of our great value. But no one believed in it, or even understood how to plant us. One man dug a hole in the earth and threw in his whole bushel of potatoes. Another put one potato here and another there in the ground, and expected that each was to come up a perfect tree from which he might shake down potatoes. And they certainly grew and produced flowers and green, watery fruit, but it all withered away. Nobody thought of what was in the ground, the blessing, the potato. Yes, we have endured and suffered. That is to say, our forefathers have. They and we, it is all one. What a story it was. Well, and that will do, said the woman. Now look at the sloe bush. We have also some near relations in the home of the potatoes, but higher towards the north than they grew," said the sloes. "There were Northmen from Norway who steered westward through mist and storm to an unknown land, where, behind ice and snow, they found plants and green meadows and bushes with blue-black grapes. Sloe bushes. The grapes were ripened by the frost, just as we are, and they called the land Wineland, that is, Groenland, or Slowland." "That is quite a romantic story," said the young man. "Yes, certainly. But now come with me," said the wise woman, and she led him to the beehive. He looked into it. What life and labor! There were bees standing in all the passages, waving their wings, so that a wholesome draught of air might blow through the great manufactory. That was their business. Then there came in bees from without, who had been born with little baskets on their feet. They brought flower dust which was poured out, sorted, and manufactured into honey and wax. They flew in and out. The queen bee wanted to fly out, but then all the other bees must have gone with her. It was not yet the time for that, but still she wanted to fly out, so the others bit off Her Majesty's wings, and she had to stay where she was. "Now, get upon the earth bank," said the wise woman. "Come and look out over the highway where you can see the people." "What a crowd it is," said the young man. "One story after another. It whirls and whirls. It's quite a confusion before my eyes. I shall go out at the back." "No, go straight forward," said the woman. "Go straight into the crowd of people. Look at them in the right way. Have an ear to hear and the right heart to feel, and you will soon invent something. But before you go away, you must give me my spectacles and my ear trumpet again." And so saying, she took both from him. "Now I do not see the smallest thing," said the young man, "and now I don't hear anything more." "Why, then, you can't be a poet by Easter," said the wise woman. "But by what time can I be one?" asked he. "Neither by Easter nor by Whitsuntide. You will not learn how to invent anything. What must I do to earn my bread by poetry?" "You can do that before Shrove Tuesday. Hunt the poets, kill their writings, and thus you will kill them. Don't be put out of countenance. Strike at them boldly, and you'll have carnival cake on which you can support yourself and your wife, too." "What one can invent," cried the young man. And so he hit out boldly at every second poet, because he could not be a poet himself. We have it from the wise woman. She knows what one can invent. Ole-Luk-Oie, the dream god. There is nobody in the world who knows so many stories as Ole-Luk-Oie, or who can relate them so nicely. In the evening, while the children are seated at the table or in their little chairs, he comes up the stairs very softly, for he walks in his socks. Then he opens the doors without the slightest noise and throws a small quantity of very fine dust in their eyes, just enough to prevent them from keeping them open, and so they do not see him. Then he creeps behind them and blows softly upon their necks till their heads begin to droop. But Ole-Luk-Oie does not wish to hurt them, for he is very fond of children, and only wants them to be quiet that he may relate to them pretty stories. And they never are quiet until they are in bed and asleep. As soon as they are asleep, Ole-Luk-Oie seats himself upon the bed. He is nicely dressed. His coat is made of silken stuff. It is impossible to say of what color, for it changes from green to red, and from red to blue, as he turns from side to side. Under each arm he carries an umbrella. One of them, with pictures on the inside, he spreads over the good children, and then they dream the most beautiful stories the whole night. But the other umbrella has no pictures, and this he holds over the naughty children so that they sleep heavily and wake in the morning without having dreamed at all. Now we shall hear how Ole-Luk-Oie came every night during a whole week to the little boy named Hjalmar, and what he told him. There were 7 stories, as there are 7 days in the week. Monday. "Now pay attention," said Ole-Luk-Oie in the evening when Hjalmar was in bed, "and I will decorate the room." Immediately, all the flowers in the flower pots became large trees, with long branches reaching to the ceiling and stretching along the walls, so that the whole room was like a greenhouse. All the branches were loaded with flowers, each flower as beautiful and as fragrant as a rose. And, had anyone tasted them, he would have found them sweeter even than jam. The fruit glittered like gold, and there were cakes so full of plums that they were nearly bursting. It was incomparably beautiful. At the same time sounded dismal moans from the table drawer in which lay Hjalmar's school books. "Bao, what can that be now?" said Ole-Luk-Oie, going to the table and pulling out the drawer. It was a slate, in such distress because of a false number in the sum, that it had almost broken itself to pieces. The pencil pulled and tugged at its string, as if it were a little dog that wanted to help, but could not. And then came a moan from Hjalmar's copybook. Oh, it was quite terrible to hear. On each leaf stood a row of capital letters, everyone having a small letter by its side. This formed a copy. Under these were other letters which Hjalmar had written. They fancied they looked like the copy, but they were mistaken, for they were leaning on one side as if they intended to fall over the pencil lines. "See, this is the way you should hold yourselves," said the copy. "Look here, you should slope thus, with a graceful curve." "Oh, we are very willing to do so, but we cannot," said Hjalmar's letters. "We are so wretchedly made." "You must be scratched out then," said Ole-Luk-Oie. "Oh no," they cried, and then they stood up so gracefully it was quite a pleasure to look at them. "Now we must give up our stories and exercise these letters," said Ole-Luk-Oie. 1, 2, 1, 2. So he drilled them till they stood up gracefully and looked as beautiful as a copy could look. But after Ole-Luk-Oie was gone and Hjalmar looked at them in the morning, they were as wretched and as awkward as ever. Tuesday. As soon as Hjalmar was in bed, Ole-Luk-Oie touched with his little magic wand all the furniture in the room, which immediately began to chatter, and each article only talked of itself. Over the chest of drawers hung a large picture in a gilt frame, representing a landscape, with fine old trees, flowers in the grass, and a broad stream, which flowed through the wood past several castles, far out into the wild ocean. Ole-Luk-Oie touched the picture with his magic wand, and immediately the birds commenced singing, the branches of the trees rustled, and the clouds moved across the sky, casting their shadows on the landscape beneath them. Then Ole-Luk-Oie lifted little Hjalmar up to the frame and placed his feet in the picture, just on the high grass. And there he stood with the sun shining down upon him through the branches of the trees. He ran to the water and seated himself in a little boat which lay there, and which was painted red and white. The sails glittered like silver, and 6 swans, each with a golden circlet round its neck and a bright blue star on its forehead, drew the boat past the green wood, where the trees talked of robbers and witches, and the flowers of beautiful little elves and fairies. whose histories the butterflies had related to them. Brilliant fish with scales like silver and gold swam after the boat, sometimes making a spring and splashing the water round them, while birds, red and blue, small and great, flew after him in 2 long lines. The gnats danced round them, and the cockchafers cried, "Buzz, buzz." They all wanted to follow Hjalmar, and all had some story to tell him. It was a most pleasant sail. Sometimes the forests were thick and dark, sometimes like a beautiful garden, gay with sunshine and flowers. Then he passed great palaces of glass and of marble, and on the balconies stood princesses, whose faces were those of little girls whom Hjalmar knew well and had often played with. One of them held out her hand, in which was a heart made of sugar, more beautiful than any confectioner ever sold. As Hjalmar sailed by, he caught hold of one side of the sugar heart and held it fast, and the princess held fast also, so that it broke in 2 pieces. Hjalmar had 1 piece, and the princess the other, but Hjalmar's was the largest. At each castle stood little princes acting as sentinels. They presented arms and had golden swords, and made it rain plums and tin soldiers, so that they must have been real princes. Hjalmar continued to sail, sometimes through woods, sometimes as it were through large halls, and then by large cities. At last he came to the town where his nurse lived, who had carried him in her arms when he was a very little boy, and had always been kind to him. She nodded and beckoned to him, and then sang the little verses she had herself composed and set to him. "How oft my memory turns to thee, my own Hjalmar, ever dear, when I could watch thy infant glee, or kiss away a pearly tear. 'Twas in my arms thy lisping tongue first spoke the half-remembered word, while o'er thy tottering steps I hung, my fond protection to afford. Farewell, I pray the heavenly power to keep thee till thy dying hour." And all the birds sang the same tune, the flowers danced on their stems, and the old trees nodded as if Ole-Luk-Oie had been telling them stories as well. Wednesday. How the rain did pour down! Hjalmar could hear it in his sleep, and when Ole-Luk-Oie opened the window, the water flowed quite up to the window-sill. It had the appearance of a large lake outside, and a beautiful ship lay close to the house. "Wilt thou sail with me tonight, little Hjalmar?" said Ole-Luk-Oie. "Then we shall see foreign countries, and thou shalt return here in the morning." All in a moment there stood Hjalmar, in his best clothes, on the deck of the noble ship, and immediately the weather became fine. They sailed through the streets, round by the church, and on every side rolled the wide great sea. They sailed till the land disappeared, and then they saw a flock of storks, who had left their own country, and were traveling to warmer climates. The storks flew one behind the other, and had already been a long, long time on the wing. One of them seemed so tired that his wings could scarcely carry him. He was the last of the row, and was soon left very far behind. At length he sunk lower and lower, with outstretched wings, flapping them in vain, till his feet touched the rigging of the ship, and he slided from the sails to the deck, and stood before them. Then a sailor boy caught him, and put him in the hen-house, with the fowls, the ducks, and the turkeys, while the poor stork stood quite bewildered amongst them. "Just look at that fellow," said the chickens. Then the turkey cock puffed himself out as large as he could, and inquired who he was, and the ducks waddled backwards, crying, "Quack, quack." Then the stork told them all about warm Africa, of the pyramids, and of the ostrich, which, like a wild horse, runs across the desert. But the ducks did not understand what he said, and quacked amongst themselves. "We are all of the same opinion, namely, that he is stupid." "Yes, to be sure, he is stupid," said the turkey-cock, and gobbled. Then the stork remained quite silent, and thought of his home in Africa. "Those are handsome, thin legs of yours," said the turkey-cock. "What do they cost a yard?" "Quack, quack, quack," grinned the ducks, but the stork pretended not to hear. "You may as well laugh," said the turkey, "for that remark was rather witty, or perhaps it was above you. Ah, is he not clever? He will be a great amusement to us while he remains here." And then he gobbled, and the ducks quacked. Gobble, gobble, quack, quack. What a terrible uproar they made, while they were having such fun among themselves. Then Hjalmar went to the hen-house, and opening the door, called to the stork. Then he hopped out on the deck. He had rested himself now, and he looked happy, and seemed as if he nodded to Hjalmar, as if to thank him. Then he spread his wings, and flew away to warmer countries, while the hens clucked, the ducks quacked, and the turkey-cock turned quite scarlet in the head. "Tomorrow you shall be made into soup," said Hjalmar to the fowls. And then he awoke, and found himself lying in his little bed. It was a wonderful journey which Ole-Luk-Oie had made him take this night. Thursday. "What do you think I have got here?" said Ole-Luk-Oie. "Do not be frightened, and you shall see a little mouse." And then he held out his hand to him, in which lay a lovely little creature. "It has come to invite you to a wedding. 2 little mice are going to enter into the marriage state tonight. They reside under the floor of your mother's storeroom, and that must be a fine dwelling place. But how can I get through the little mouse hole in the floor?" asked Hjalmar. "Leave me to manage that," said Ole-Luk-Oie. "I will soon make you small enough." And then he touched Hjalmar with his magic wand, whereupon he became less and less, until at last he was not longer than a little finger. "Now you can borrow the dress of the tin soldier. I think it will just fit you. It looks well to wear a uniform when you go into company." "Yes, certainly," said Hjalmar. And in a moment he was dressed as neatly as the neatest of all tin soldiers. "Will you be so good as to seat yourself in your mamma's thimble," said the little mouse, "that I may have the pleasure of drawing you to the wedding?" "Will you really take so much trouble, young lady?" said Hjalmar. And so in this way he rode to the mouse's wedding. First they went under the floor, and then passed through a long passage, which was scarcely high enough to allow the thimble to drive under, and the whole passage was lit up with the phosphorescent light of rotten wood. "Does it not smell delicious?" asked the mouse as she drew him along. "The wall and the floor have been smeared with bacon rind. Nothing can be nicer." Very soon they arrived at the bridal hall. On the right stood all the little lady mice, whispering and giggling as if they were making game of each other. To the left were the gentleman mice, stroking their whiskers with their forepaws, and in the center of the hall could be seen the bridal pair, standing side by side in a hollow cheese rind, and kissing each other, while all eyes were upon them, for they had already been betrothed, and were soon to be married. More and more friends kept arriving, till the mice were nearly treading each other to death, for the bridal pair now stood in the doorway, and none could pass in or out. The room had been rubbed over with bacon rind, like the passage, which was all the refreshment offered to the guests. But for dessert they produced a pea. on which a mouse belonging to the bridal pair had bitten the first letters of their names. This was something quite uncommon. All the mice said it was a very beautiful wedding, and that they had been very agreeably entertained. After this, Hjalmar returned home. He had certainly been in grand society, but he had been obliged to creep under a room and to make himself small enough to wear the uniform of a tin soldier. Friday. "It is incredible how many old people there are who would be glad to have me at night," said Ole-Luk-Oie, "especially those who have done something wrong. 'Good little Ole,' say they to me, 'we cannot close our eyes, and we lie awake the whole night and see all our evil deeds sitting on our beds like little imps and sprinkling us with hot water. Will you come and drive them away, that we may have a good night's rest?' And then they sigh so deeply and say, 'We would gladly pay you for it. Good night, Ole-Luk, the money lies on the window.' But I never do anything for gold." "What shall we do tonight?" asked Hjalmar. "I do not know whether you would care to go to another wedding," he replied, "although it is quite a different affair to the one we saw last night. Your sister's large doll, that is dressed like a man and is called Herman, intends to marry the doll Bertha. It is also the doll's birthday, and they will receive many presents." "Yes, I know that already," said Hjalmar. "My sister always allows her dolls to keep their birthdays or to have a wedding when they require new clothes. That has happened already 100 times. I am quite sure." "Yes, so it may. But tonight is the 101st wedding, and when that has taken place, it must be the last. Therefore, this is to be extremely beautiful. Only look." Hjalmar looked at the table, and there stood the little cardboard doll's house, with lights in all the windows, and drawn up before it were the tin soldiers presenting arms. The bridal pair were seated on the floor, leaning against the leg of the table, looking very thoughtful, and with good reason. Then Ole-Luk-Oie, dressed up in grandmother's black gown, married them. As soon as the ceremony was concluded, all the furniture in the room joined in singing a beautiful song, which had been composed by the lead pencil, and which went to the melody of a military tattoo. What merry sounds are on the wind, as marriage rites together bind a quiet and a loving pair, though formed of kid, yet smooth and fair. Hurrah, if they are deaf and blind, we'll sing, though weather prove unkind. And now came the present, but the bridal pair had nothing to eat, for love was to be their food. "Shall we go to a country house or travel?" asked the bridegroom. Then they consulted the swallow who had traveled so far, and the old hen in the yard, who had brought up 5 broods of chickens. And the swallow talked to them of warm countries, where the grapes hang in large clusters on the vines, and the air is soft and mild, and about the mountains glowing with colors more beautiful than we can think of. "But they have no red cabbage like we have," said the hen. "I was once in the country with my chickens for a whole summer. There was a large sand pit in which we could walk about and scratch as we liked. Then we got into a garden in which grew red cabbage. Oh, how nice it was! I cannot think of anything more delicious." "But one cabbage stalk is exactly like another," said the swallow. "And here we have often bad weather." "Yes, but we are accustomed to it," said the hen. "But it is so cold here, and freezes sometimes." "Cold weather is good for cabbages," said the hen. "Besides, we do have it warm here sometimes. 4 years ago, we had a summer that lasted more than 5 weeks, and it was so hot one could scarcely breathe. And then, in this country, We have no poisonous animals, and we are free from robbers. He must be wicked who does not consider our country the finest of all lands. He ought not to be allowed to live here. And then the hen wept very much and said, I have also traveled. I once went 12 miles in a coop, and it was not pleasant traveling at all. The hen is a sensible woman, said the doll Bertha. I don't care for traveling over mountains just to go up and come down again. No, let us go to the sand pit in front of the gate and then take a walk in the cabbage garden. And so they settled it. Saturday. Am I to hear any more stories? Asked little Hjalmar as soon as Ole-Luk-Oie had sent him to sleep. We shall have no time this evening, said he, spreading out his prettiest umbrella over the child. Look at these Chinese. And then the whole umbrella appeared like a large china bowl with blue trees and pointed bridges, upon which stood little Chinamen nodding their heads. We must make all the world beautiful for tomorrow morning, said Ole-Luk-Oie, for it will be a holiday. It is Sunday. I must now go to the church steeple and see if the little sprites who live there have polished the bells, so that they may sound sweetly. Then I must go into the fields and see if the wind has blown the dust from the grass and the leaves, and the most difficult task of all which I have to do is to take down all the stars and brighten them up. I have to number them first before I put them in my apron, and also to number the places from which I take them, so that they may go back into the right holes, or else they would not remain, and we should have a number of falling stars, for they would all tumble down one after the other. Hark ye, Mr. Luke-Oie, said an old portrait which hung on the wall of Hjalmar's bedroom. Do you know me? I am Hjalmar's great-grandfather. I thank you for telling the boy stories. But you must not confuse his ideas. The stars cannot be taken down from the sky and polished. They are spheres like our earth, which is a good thing for them. Thank you, old great-grandfather, said Ole-Luk-Oie. I thank you. You may be the head of the family, as no doubt you are, but I am older than you. I am an ancient heathen. The old Romans and Greeks named me the dream god. I have visited the noblest houses and continue to do so. Still, I know how to conduct myself both to high and low. And now you may tell the stories yourself. And so Ole-Luk-Oie walked off, taking his umbrellas with him. Well, well, one is never to give an opinion. I suppose, grumbled the portrait. And it woke Hjalmar. Sunday. Good evening, said Ole-Luk-Oie. Hjalmar nodded and then sprang out of bed and turned his great-grandfather's portrait to the wall so that it might not interrupt them as it had done yesterday. Now, said he, you must tell me some stories about 5 green peas that lived in one pod, or of the chickseed that courted the chickweed, or of the darning needle who acted so proudly because she fancied herself an embroidery needle. You may have too much of a good thing, said Ole-Luk-Oie. You know that I like best to show you something, so I will show you my brother. He is also called Ole-Luk-Oie, but he never visits anyone but once, and when he does come, he takes him away on his horse and tells him stories as they ride along. He knows only 2 stories. One of these is so wonderfully beautiful that no one in the world can imagine anything at all like it. But the other is just as ugly and frightful, so that it would be impossible to describe it. Then Ole-Luk-Oie lifted Hjalmar up to the window. There now, you can see my brother, the other Ole-Luk-Oie. He is also called Death. You perceive he is not so bad as they represent him in picture books. There he is a skeleton, but now his coat is embroidered with silver, and he wears the splendid uniform of a hussar, and a mantle of black velvet flies behind him over the horse. Look how he gallops along." Hjalmar saw that as this Ole-Luk-Oie rode on, he lifted up old and young and carried them away on his horse. Some he seated in front of him, and some behind, but always inquired first, "How stands the mark book?" "Good," they all answered. "Yes, but let me see for myself," he replied, and they were obliged to give him the books. Then all those who had very good or exceedingly good came in front of the horse and heard the beautiful story, while those who had middling or tolerably good in their books were obliged to sit behind and listen to the frightful tale. They trembled and cried and wanted to jump down from the horse, but they could not get free, for they seemed fastened to the seat. "Why, death is a most splendid Luk-Oie," said Hjalmar. "I am not in the least afraid of him." "You need have no fear of him," said Ole-Luk-Oie, "if you take care and keep a good conduct book." "Now I call that very instructive," murmured the great-grandfather's portrait. "It is useful sometimes to express an opinion," so he was quite satisfied. These are some of the doings and sayings of Ole-Luk-Oie. I hope he may visit you himself this evening and relate some more. Little Tuk. Yes, they called him Little Tuk, but it was not his real name. He had called himself so before he could speak plainly, and he meant it for Charles. It was all very well for those who knew him, but not for strangers. Little Tuk was left at home to take care of his little sister, Gustava, who was much younger than himself, and he had to learn his lessons at the same time, and the two things could not very well be performed together. The poor boy sat there with his sister on his lap and sung to her all the songs he knew, and now and then he looked into his geography lesson that lay open before him. By the next morning, he had to learn by heart all the towns in Zealand, and all that could be described of them. His mother came home at last, and took little Gustava in her arms. Then Tuk ran to the window, and read so eagerly that he nearly read his eyes out, for it had become darker and darker every minute, and his mother had no money to buy a light. "There goes the old washerwoman up the lane," said the mother as she looked out of the window. "The poor woman can hardly drag herself along, and now she had to drag a pail of water from the well. Be a good boy, Tuk, and run across and help the old woman, won't you?" So Tuk ran across quickly and helped her, but when he came back into the room, it was quite dark, and there was not a word said about a light, so he was obliged to go to bed on his little truckle bedstead, and there he lay and thought of his geography lesson, and of Zealand, and of all the master had told him. He ought really to have read it over again, but he could not for want of light. So he put the geography book under his pillow, for he had heard that this was a great help towards learning a lesson, but not always to be depended upon. He still lay thinking and thinking, when all at once it seemed as if someone kissed him on his eyes and mouth. He slept, and yet he did not sleep, and it appeared as if the old washerwoman looked at him with kind eyes and said, "It would be a great pity if you did not know your lesson tomorrow morning. You helped me, and now I will help you. And Providence will always keep those who help themselves." And at the same time, the book under Tuk's pillow began to move about. "Cluck, cluck, cluck," cried a hen as she crept towards him. "I am a hen from Cayuga." And then she told him how many inhabitants the town contained, and about a battle that had been fought there, which really was not worth speaking of. Crack, crack. Down fell something. It was a wooden bird, the parrot which is used as a target as Prasto. He said there were as many inhabitants in that town as he had nails in his body. He was very proud, and said, "Thorwaldsen lived close to me, and here I am now, quite comfortable." But now little Tuk was no longer in bed. All in a moment he found himself on horseback. Gallop, gallop. Away he went, seated in front of a richly attired knight, with a waving plume, who held him on the saddle, and so they rode through the wood by the old town of Vordingborg, which was very large and busy. The king's castle was surrounded by lofty towers, and radiant light streamed from all the windows. Within, there were songs and dancing. King Waldemar and the young, gaily dressed ladies of the court were dancing together. Morning dawned, and as the sun rose, the whole city and the king's castle sank suddenly down together. One tower after another fell, till at last only one remained standing on the hill where the castle had formerly been. The town now appeared small and poor, and the schoolboys read in their books, which they carried under their arms, that it contained 2,000 inhabitants. But this was a mere boast, for it did not contain so many. And again little Tuk lay in his bed, scarcely knowing whether he was dreaming or not, for someone stood by him. "Tuk, little Tuk," said a voice. It was a very little person who spoke. He was dressed as a sailor and looked small enough to be a middy, but he was not one. "I bring you many greetings from Corsor. It is a rising town, full of life. It has steamships and mail coaches. In times past they used to call it ugly, but that is no longer true. I lie on the seashore," said Corsor. "I have high roads and pleasure gardens. I have given birth to a poet who was witty and entertaining, which they are not all. I once wanted to fit out a ship to sail round the world, but I did not accomplish it, though most likely I might have done so. But I am fragrant with perfume, for close to my gates most lovely roses bloom." Then before the eyes of little Tuk appeared a confusion of colors, red and green, but it cleared off, and he could distinguish a cliff close to the bay, the slopes of which were quite overgrown with verdure, and on its summit stood a fine old church with pointed towers. Springs of water flowed out of the cliff in thick waterspouts, so that there was a continual splashing. Close by sat an old king with a golden crown on his white head. This was King Hror of the Springs, and near the springs stood the town of Roskilde, as it is called. Then all the kings and queens of Denmark went up the ascent to the old church, hand in hand, with golden crowns on their heads, while the organ played and the fountains sent forth jets of water. Little Tuk saw and heard it all. "Don't forget the names of these towns," said King Hror. All at once everything vanished. But where? It seemed to him like turning over the leaves of a book. And now there stood before him an old peasant woman who had come from Sorøy, where the grass grows in the marketplace. She had a green linen apron thrown over her head and shoulders, and it was quite wet, as if it had been raining heavily. "Yes, that it has," said she. And then, just as she was going to tell him a great many pretty stories from Holberg's comedies, and about Waldemar and Absalom, she suddenly shrunk up together and wagged her head as if she were a frog about to spring. "Croak," she cried. "It is always wet, and as quiet as death in Sorø." Then little Tuk saw she was changed into a frog. Croak, and again she was an old woman. "One must dress according to the weather," said she. "It is wet, and my town is just like a bottle. By the cork we must go in, and by the cork we must come out again. In olden times I had beautiful fish, and now I have fresh, rosy-cheeked boys in the bottom of the bottle, and they learn wisdom, Hebrew and Greek. Croak." How it sounded like the cry of the frogs on the moor, or like the creaking of great boots when someone is marching. Always the same tone, so monotonous and wearing, that little Tuk at length fell fast asleep, and then the sound could not annoy him. But even in this sleep came a dream, or something like it. His little sister Gustava, with her blue eyes and fair curly hair, had grown up a beautiful maiden all at once, and without having wings she could fly. And they flew together over Zealand, over green forests and blue lakes. "Hark, so you hear the cock crow, little Tuk. Cock-a-doodle-doo. The fowls are flying out of Kyoga. You shall have a large farmyard. You shall never suffer hunger or want. The bird of good omen shall be yours, and you shall become a rich and happy man. Your house shall rise up like King Waldemar's towers, and shall be richly adorned with marble statues like those at Prasto. Understand me well. Your name shall travel with fame round the world, like the ship that was to sail from Corsor. And at Roskilde, don't forget the names of the towns, as King Hroar said. You shall speak well and clearly, little Tuk, and when at last you lie in your grave, you shall sleep peacefully, as if I lay in Soroi, said little Tuk, awaking. It was bright daylight, and he could not remember his dream, but that was not necessary, for we are not to know what will happen to us in the future. Then he sprang out of bed quickly and read over his lesson in the book, and knew it all at once quite correctly. The old washerwoman put her head in at the door and nodded to him quite kindly and said, "Many thanks, you good child, for your help yesterday. I hope all your beautiful dreams will come true." Little Tuk did not at all know what he had dreamt, but one above did. A string of pearls. The railroad in Denmark still extends only from Copenhagen to Korsør. It is a string of pearls. Europe has a wealth of these pearls. Its most costly are named Paris, London, Vienna, Naples. And yet many a man will point out as his favorite pearl not one of these great cities, but rather some little country town that is still the home of homes to him, the home of those dearest to him. Yes, often it is not a town at all, but a single homestead, a little house, hidden among green hedges, a place hardly visible as the train speeds by. How many pearls are there on the line from Copenhagen to Korsør? We will consider just 6, which most people must notice. Old memories and poetry itself give a luster to these pearls, so that they shine in our thoughts. Near the hill where stands the palace of Frederick VI, the home of Oehlenschläger's childhood, one of these pearls glistens, sheltered by Søndermarken's woody ground. It used to be called the cottage of Philemon and Baucis. Here lived Rabeck and his wife, Kama. Here, under their hospitable roof, assembled many of the generation's finest intellects from busy Copenhagen. It was the festival home of the intellectual. Now don't say, "Ah, what a change." No, it is still the home of the intellect, a conservatory for sick plants, for buds which do not have the strength to unfold their true beauty of color and form, or show the blossoming and fruit-bearing which is hidden within them. The insane asylum, surrounded by human love, is truly a spot of holiness, a hospital for the sick plants that shall someday be transplanted to bloom in the paradise of God. The weakest minds are assembled now here, where once the strongest and keenest met to exchange thoughts and ideas. But still the flame of generosity mounts heavenward from the cottage of Philemon and Baucis, ancient Roskilde, the burial town of kings. By Hroar's spring now lies before us. The slender towers of the church lift up above the low town and mirror themselves in Isefjord. Only one grave shall we seek here. It is not that of the mighty Queen Margrethe. No, within the white-walled churchyard which we speed close by is the grave, and over it lays a small, plain stone. The master of the organ, the reviver of the old Danish romances, rests here. We recall, the clear waves rolled, and there dwelt a king in Lera. Roskilde, burial place of kings. In your pearl, we see the insignificant gravestone whereon is cut a lyre and the name Weise. Now we reach Zigersted, near the town of Ringsted. The bed of the river is low here. Yellow corn waves over the spot where Hagbarth's boat lay at anchor, not far from Signa's maiden bower. Who does not know the legend of Hagbarth, who was hanged on the oak tree while the bower of Signa burst into flames? Who can forget that legend of immortal love? Beautiful sorrow, encircled by woods. Your quiet old cloistered town peeps out through its mossy trees. The keen eyes of youth from the academy can look across the lake toward the world's highway and hear the roar of the locomotive's dragon as it speeds through the woods. Sorrow, pearl of poetry, you are guarding the dust of Holberg. Your palace of learning stands beside the deep woodland lake like a great white swan, and nearby, like the bright star-flower of the woods, there gleams a tiny cottage whence pious hymns echo throughout the land. Words are spoken within, and the peasant listens and learns of Denmark's bygone days. As the song of the bird is to the greenwood, so is Ingemund to sorrow. On to the town of Slagelse. What is mirrored here in this pearl's luster? Gone forever is the cloister of Antorskov, note Antvorskov. Vanished are the rich halls of the castle, even the last remaining wing. Yet one relic of olden times still lingers here, the wooden cross on the hill. It has been repaired again and again, for it marks the spot where, legend tells us, Saint Anders, holy priest of Slagelse, awoke after having been brought there from Jerusalem in a single night. Korsur, birthplace of Baggesen, master of words and wit. The ruined old ramparts of the fallen fortress are now the last visible witness of your childhood home. Their lengthening sunset shadows point to the spot where stood the house in which you were born. From these hills you looked toward Sprogo and sang in undying verse. Nowhere have roses so red a hue, and nowhere are feathers so light and so blue. Nowhere the thorns so daintily grown as those to childhood innocence known. Humorous, charming singer, we shall weave for thee a garland of woodbine and fling it into the lake, so that the current may bear it to the coast of Kielerfjord, where your ashes rest. The tide shall bring you a greeting from the new generation, a greeting from your birthplace, Korsur, where I drop my string of pearls. That's quite right. A string of pearls does stretch from Copenhagen to Korsur, said grandmother when she had heard this read aloud. It's a string of pearls for me now, as it was more than 40 years ago. We had no railroad then. We spent days on a trip that can now be made in as many hours. That was in 1815, and I was 21. That is a charming age. Although to be up in the 60s, that is also a wonderful age. In my young days, it was a much rarer event than it is now to come to Copenhagen, which we considered the town of all towns. My parents hadn't visited it for 20 years, but at last they were going, and I was going with them. We had talked about that journey for years before, and now it was actually coming true. It seemed as though a new life were beginning for me. And really, in a way, a new life did begin for me. There was such a bustle of sewing and packing, and when at last we were ready to start, such a crowd of friends came to bid us farewell. It was a long journey we had ahead of us. Shortly before noon, we drove out of Odense in my parents' Holstein carriage, and our friends waved to us from the windows all the way down the street till we passed through St. Jürgen's Gate. The weather was beautiful, the birds sang, and everything was joyful. We forgot what a long and tiresome road it was to Nyborg. We reached it toward evening, but the little sailing vessel had to wait for the mail, which didn't arrive until night. Then we got on board, and as far as we could see, the wide, smooth waters lay before us. We lay down and went to sleep in our clothes. When I awoke and came on deck next morning, I could see nothing at all. A heavy fog covered everything. When I heard the cocks crowing, I knew it must be sunrise. Bells were ringing, but I didn't know where. Then the mist lifted, and we found we were still lying very close to Nyborg. Later in the day, a wind came up, but it was against us. We tacked back and forth, and at last were lucky enough to reach Korsør by a little past 11 that night, having spent 22 hours to go 16 miles. It was good to get ashore, but it was dark. The lamps were weak, and it all seemed very strange to me, who had never been in any other town but Odense. "Look," said my father, "Baggesen was born there, and Birkner lived in that house." When I heard that, somehow the dark old town with its narrow little streets seemed to grow larger and brighter, and we were so glad to feel solid earth under our feet. There was no sleep for me that night, for I was so excited over all that I had seen and heard since I had left home the day before. Next morning we had to leave early. There was a terrible road ahead of us, with great bumps and holes as far as Slagelse, and not much better from there on, and we wanted to get to the Crab Inn early, so that on the same day we could reach Sorø and visit the Møller's Emil, as we called him then. Yes, he was your grandfather, my late husband, the dean. He was a student at Sorø then, and had just passed his second examination. That afternoon we reached the Crab Inn, which was a gallant place at that time, the very best inn on the whole trip, with the prettiest country around it. Yes, but you must all admit that it still is. Madame Plambeck was an industrious hostess, and everything in her house was as smoothly scoured as a larding board. On the wall they had, framed under glass, Baggesen's letter to her. It was indeed worth seeing, and I greatly enjoyed looking at it. Then he went to Sorø and found Emil there. You can imagine how glad we were to see him, and he to see us. He was so thoughtful and charming. He took us to see the church and the graves of Absalon and Holberg. He inspected the old monkish inscriptions with us, and sailed with us across the lake to Parneset. It was the most wonderful evening I remember. I was thinking that to become a poet, one had only to come to Sorø and meditate among those lovely, peaceful scenes. By moonlight we followed the Philosopher's Walk, as it's called, the wonderful and lonely little path beside the lake that joins the highway near the Crab Inn. Emil stayed for supper with us, and my father and my mother declared he had grown so sensible and looked so well. It was almost Whitsuntide, and he promised that in a few days he would be in Copenhagen to join us and his family. Ah, those few hours in sorrow and at the Crab Inn I count among the choicest pearls of my life. Next morning we again started very early, for we had a long trip to Roskilde, where we wanted to see the church, and Father wanted to visit an old school friend that evening. We spent that night in Roskilde and reached Copenhagen by noon the next day. So we had spent about 3 days on a journey that can now be made in 3 hours, Korsør to Copenhagen. The pearls on that way have not grown more costly. That could never be, but the string is new and wonderful. I stayed with my parents in Copenhagen for 3 weeks. Emil was with us for 18 whole days, and when we returned to Funen, he went with us as far as Korsør. There, before we parted, we were betrothed. So it is no wonder I should call the road from Copenhagen to Korsør a string of pearls. Afterwards, when Emil received his post at Assens, we were married. We often talked about that journey to Copenhagen and intended doing it again. But then your mother came along, and after her came her brothers and sisters. And with all of them there was so much to do and take care of. Then your grandfather was promoted and made a dean. Yes, everything was happiness and joy, but we never got to Copenhagen again. No, I have never been there since, though we often thought and talked about it. Now I'm much too old to travel by rail, but still I'm right glad there is a railway. It's a real blessing because it brings you young ones to me more quickly. Nowadays, Odense is hardly farther from Copenhagen than in my youth it was from Nyborg. You can speed to Italy in the time it took us to reach Copenhagen. Yes, that is certainly something. It doesn't matter that I just sit here always. Let the others travel, so long as they sometimes travel to me. And you needn't laugh at me, you young people, for sitting so still here day after day. I have really a wonderful journey ahead of me. I shall soon have to travel at a speed far greater than the railways. For when our Lord calls me, I shall go to join your grandfather. And when you have completed your work on this dear earth, you too will join us. And then, if we talk over the days of our mortal life, believe me, dear children, I shall say then as I do now, from Copenhagen to Korsør is a perfect string of pearls. The Tinder-Box. A soldier came marching along the high road. Left, right, left, right. He had his knapsack on his back and a sword at his side. He had been to the wars and was now returning home. As he walked on, he met a very frightful-looking old witch in the road. Her underlip hung quite down on her breast, and she stopped and said, "Good evening, soldier. You have a very fine sword and a large knapsack, and you are a real soldier, so you shall have as much money as ever you like." "Thank you, old witch," said the soldier. "Do you see that large tree?" said the witch, pointing to a tree which stood beside them. "Well, it is quite hollow inside, and you must climb to the top, when you will see a hole, through which you can let yourself down into the tree to a great depth. I will tie a rope round your body, so that I can pull you up again when you call out to me. But what am I to do down there in the tree?" "Ask the soldier. Get money," she replied, "for you must know that when you reach the ground under the tree, you will find yourself in a large hall, lighted up by 300 lamps. You will then see 3 doors, which can be easily opened, for the keys are in all the locks. On entering the first of the chambers to which these doors lead, you will see a large chest standing in the middle of the floor, and upon it a dog seated, with a pair of eyes as large as teacups. But you need not be at all afraid of him. I will give you my blue checked apron, which you must spread upon the floor, and then boldly seize hold of the dog and place him upon it. You can then open the chest and take from it as many pence as you please. They are only copper pence. But if you would rather have silver money, you must go into the second chamber. Here you will find another dog, with eyes as big as mill wheels. But do not let that trouble you. Place him upon my apron, and then take what money you please. If, however, you like gold best, enter the third chamber, where there is another chest full of it. The dog who sits on this chest is very dreadful. His eyes are as big as a tower, but do not mind him. If he also is placed upon my apron, he cannot hurt you, and you may take from the chest what gold you will." "This is not a bad story," said the soldier. "But what am I to give you, you old witch? For of course you do not mean to tell me all this for nothing." "No," said the witch, "but I do not ask for a single penny. Only promise to bring me an old tinder-box, which my grandmother left behind the last time she went down there." "Very well, I promise. Now tie the rope round my body." "Here it is," replied the witch, "and here is my blue checked apron." As soon as the rope was tied, the soldier climbed up the tree and let himself down through the hollow to the ground beneath. And here he found, as the witch had told him, a large hall in which many hundred lamps were all burning. Then he opened the first door. Ah! There sat the dog, with the eyes as large as teacups, staring at him. "You're a pretty fellow," said the soldier, seizing him and placing him on the witch's apron, while he filled his pockets from the chest with as many pieces as they would hold. Then he closed the lid, seated the dog upon it again, and walked into another chamber, and sure enough, there sat the dog, with eyes as big as mill wheels. "You had better not look at me in that way," said the soldier. "You will make your eyes water." And then he seated him also upon the apron and opened the chest. But when he saw what a quantity of silver money it contained, he very quickly threw away all the coppers he had taken and filled his pockets and his knapsack with nothing but silver. Then he went into the third room, and there the dog was really hideous. His eyes were truly as big as towers, and they turned round and round in his head like wheels. "Good morning," said the soldier, touching his cap, for he had never seen such a dog in his life. But after looking at him more closely, he thought he had been civil enough, so he placed him on the floor and opened the chest. Good gracious, what a quantity of gold there was! Enough to buy all the sugar sticks of the sweet stuff women, all the tin soldiers, whips, and rocking horses in the world, or even the whole town itself. There was, indeed, an immense quantity. So the soldier now threw away all the silver money he had taken and filled his pockets and his knapsack with gold instead. And not only his pockets and his knapsack, but even his cap and boots, so that he could scarcely walk. He was really rich now, so he replaced the dog on the chest, closed the door, and called up through the tree, "Now pull me out, you old witch." "Have you got the tinder-box?" asked the witch. "No, I declare I quite forgot it." So he went back and fetched the tinder-box, and then the witch drew him up out of the tree, and he stood again in the high road, with his pockets, his knapsack, his cap, and his boots full of gold. "What are you going to do with the tinder-box?" asked the soldier. "That is nothing to you," replied the witch. "You have the money, now give me the tinder-box." "I tell you what," said the soldier, "if you don't tell me what you are going to do with it, I will draw my sword and cut off your head." "No," said the witch. The soldier immediately cut off her head, and there she lay on the ground. Then he tied up all his money in her apron and slung it on his back like a bundle, put the tinder-box in his pocket, and walked off to the nearest town. It was a very nice town, and he put up at the best inn and ordered a dinner of all his favorite dishes, for now he was rich and had plenty of money. The servant who cleaned his boots thought they certainly were a shabby pair to be worn by such a rich gentleman, for he had not yet bought any new ones. The next day, however, he procured some good clothes and proper boots, so that our soldier soon became known as a fine gentleman, and the people visited him and told him all the wonders that were to be seen in the town, and of the king's beautiful daughter, the princess. "Where can I see her?" asked the soldier. "She is not to be seen at all," they said. "She lives in a large copper castle, surrounded by walls and towers. No one but the king himself can pass in or out, for there has been a prophecy that she will marry a common soldier, and the king cannot bear to think of such a marriage." "I should like very much to see her," thought the soldier, but he could not obtain permission to do so. However, he passed a very pleasant time, went to the theater, drove in the king's garden, and gave a great deal of money to the poor, which was very good of him. He remembered what it had been in olden times to be without a shilling. Now he was rich, had fine clothes, and many friends, who all declared he was a fine fellow and a real gentleman, and all this gratified him exceedingly. But his money would not last forever, and as he spent and gave away a great deal daily, and received none, he found himself at last with only 2 shillings left. So he was obliged to leave his elegant rooms, and live in a little garret under the roof, where he had to clean his own boots, and even mend them with a large needle. None of his friends came to see him. There were too many stairs to mount up. One dark evening, he had not even a penny to buy a candle. Then, all at once, he remembered that there was a piece of candle stuck in the tinder-box, which he had brought from the old tree, into which the witch had helped him. He found the tinder-box, but no sooner had he struck a few sparks from the flint and steel than the door flew open, and the dog, with eyes as big as teacups, whom he had seen while down in the tree, stood before him and said, "What orders, master?" "Hello," said the soldier. "Well, this is a pleasant tinder-box, if it brings me all I wish for." "Bring me some money," said he to the dog. He was gone in a moment, and presently returned, carrying a large bag of coppers in his month. The soldier very soon discovered after this the value of the tinder-box. If he struck the flint once, the dog who sat on the chest of copper money made his appearance. If twice, the dog came from the chest of silver. And if 3 times, the dog with eyes like towers, who watched over the gold. The soldier had now plenty of money. He returned to his elegant rooms and reappeared in his fine clothes, so that his friends knew him again directly, and made as much of him as before. After a while, he began to think it was very strange that no one could get a look at the princess. "Everyone says she is very beautiful," thought he to himself. "But what is the use of that if she is to be shut up in a copper castle, surrounded by so many towers? Can I by any means get to see her? Stop! Where is my tinder-box?" Then he struck a light, and in a moment the dog, with eyes as big as teacups, stood before him. "It is midnight," said the soldier, Yet I should very much like to see the princess, if only for a moment." The dog disappeared instantly, and before the soldier could even look round, he returned with the princess. She was lying on the dog's back, asleep, and looked so lovely that everyone who saw her would know she was a real princess. The soldier could not help kissing her, true soldier as he was. Then the dog ran back with the princess, but in the morning, while at breakfast with the king and queen, she told them what a singular dream she had had during the night of a dog and a soldier, that she had ridden on the dog's back and been kissed by the soldier. "That is a very pretty story indeed," said the queen. So the next night one of the old ladies of the court was set to watch by the princess's bed to discover whether it really was a dream or what else it might be. The soldier longed very much to see the princess once more, so he sent for the dog again in the night to fetch her and to run with her as fast as ever he could. But the old lady put on water boots and ran after him as quickly as he did, and found that he carried the princess into a large house. She thought it would help her to remember the place if she made a large cross on the door with a piece of chalk. Then she went home to bed, and the dog presently returned with the princess. But when he saw that a cross had been made on the door of the house where the soldier lived, he took another piece of chalk and made crosses on all the doors in the town, so that the lady-in-waiting might not be able to find out the right door. Early the next morning the king and queen accompanied the lady and all the officers of the household to see where the princess had been. "Here it is," said the king, when they came to the first door with a cross on it. "No, my dear husband, it must be that one," said the queen, pointing to a second door having a cross also. "And here is one, and there is another," they all exclaimed, for there were crosses on all the doors in every direction. So they felt it would be useless to search any farther. But the queen was a very clever woman. She could do a great deal more than merely ride in a carriage. She took her large gold scissors, cut a piece of silk into squares, and made a neat little bag. This bag she filled with buckwheat flour and tied it round the princess's neck. And then she cut a small hole in the bag so that the flour might be scattered on the ground as the princess went along. During the night, the dog came again and carried the princess on his back and ran with her to the soldier, who loved her very much and wished that he had been a prince so that he might have her for a wife. The dog did not observe how the flour ran out of the bag all the way from the castle wall to the soldier's house, and even up to the window where he had climbed with the princess. Therefore, in the morning the king and queen found out where their daughter had been, and the soldier was taken up and put in prison. Oh, how dark and disagreeable it was as he sat there, and the people said to him, "Tomorrow you will be hanged." It was not very pleasant news, and besides, he had left the tinder-box at the inn. In the morning he could see through the iron grating of the little window how the people were hastening out of the town to see him hanged. He heard the drums beating and saw the soldiers marching. Everyone ran out to look at them, and a shoemaker's boy with a leather apron and slippers on galloped by so fast that one of his slippers flew off and struck against the wall where the soldier sat looking through the iron grating. "Hello, you shoemaker's boy. You need not be in such a hurry," cried the soldier to him. "There will be nothing to see till I come, but if you will run to the house where I have been living and bring me my tinder-box, you shall have 4 shillings, but you must put your best foot foremost." The shoemaker's boy liked the idea of getting the 4 shillings, So he ran very fast and fetched the tinder-box and gave it to the soldier. And now we shall see what happened. Outside the town, a large gibbet had been erected, round which stood the soldiers and several thousands of people. The king and the queen sat on splendid thrones opposite to the judges and the whole council. The soldier already stood on the ladder, but as they were about to place the rope around his neck, he said that an innocent request was often granted to a poor criminal before he suffered death. He wished very much to smoke a pipe, as it would be the last pipe he should ever smoke in the world. The king could not refuse this request, so the soldier took his tinder-box and struck fire. Once, twice, thrice, and there in a moment stood all the dogs. The one with eyes as big as teacups, the one with eyes as large as mill wheels, and the third, whose eyes were like towers. "Help me now, that I may not be hanged," cried the soldier. And the dogs fell upon the judges and all the counselors, seized one by the legs and another by the nose, and tossed them many feet high in the air, so that they fell down and were dashed to pieces. "I will not be touched," said the king. But the largest dog seized him, as well as the queen, and threw them after the others. Then the soldiers and all the people were afraid, and cried, "Good soldier, you shall be our king, and you shall marry the beautiful princess." So they placed the soldier in the king's carriage, and the three dogs ran on in front and cried, "Hurrah!" And the little boys whistled through their fingers, and the soldiers presented arms. The princess came out of the copper castle and became queen, which was very pleasing to her. The wedding festivities lasted a whole week, and the dogs sat at the table and stared with all their eyes.